If you've been observing the political conversation for the past few years, you have undoubtedly come across this word.
Russian disinformation operation.
Russian disinformation.
Pushing Russian disinformation.
It does bear the hallmarks of Russian disinformation.
Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo.
Hunter Biden's to talk about the demon of disinformation that has black male voters in Georgia willing to support Raphael Warnock, but not Stacey Abrams. Disinformation.
Solving the disinformation problem won't cure all that ails our democracies or tears at the fabric of our world. But it can help tamp down divisions and let us rebuild the trust and solidarity needed to make our democracy stronger.
Disinformation. This little word, which was not really used en masse prior to 2017, has now become the basis for social media policies, government action, action from global think tanks on how to combat threats and how to deal with new issues in the modern era. This one word has become a rallying call for almost every major elite institution in society that have been directed towards it. And most importantly, this word has become the basis for many policies in social media companies that curb freedom of expression. So, my friends, whenever we have a word that is relatively new and was not in prominent use before a certain period of time, we should always ask ourselves, how did this word come about? What does the word actually mean? And is the word actually advantageous to people like us, like you and me, who want to engage with the truth? Because, my friends, we live in a century of lies. We live in a world of lies. We live in a world where there are a lot of people, a lot of very powerful people, attempting to manipulate your perception, distort your belief systems, and instill you with values that may not actually be advantageous to what you should truly be doing as a free American and as a human being. And so in this video, my friends, I intend to break down 3 things for you. Number 1, what does disinformation, the word or the concept, mean? Number 2, where did it come from? And number 3, how and why is this word so dangerous to the prospect of a free and prosperous society? You don't need to be a liberal, a conservative, a Democrat, Republican to appreciate what I'm going to say here. Because if you believe that society is best when free expression flourishes, when there are a wide range of issues and concepts able to be debated, and when honesty is a virtue, not a vice, then you will most certainly, I believe, agree with my conclusions at the very end of this video. Now, my friends, let us answer the first question. Where did the word disinformation come from? Many of you may have seen the thumbnail of this video, and it actually involves a hammer and sickle. That is because, my friends, the word disinformation was quite literally created by Soviet propagandists, by communists, to demonize the West and demonize capitalism. Many of you may say, oh, this is some sort of crazy right-wing conspiracy, but this is not the case. See, when we engage in true philosophical reasoning, we will try to understand the nature of things. What is the nature of the world? What is the nature of truth? What is the nature of a certain word? And the nature of disinformation, when we go back through history, shows a very, very stunning picture. So, my friends, according to a book written by a former KGB operative, Lieutenant General Mihai Pasipa, I'm probably butchering his name, the book called Disinformation, former spy chief reveals secret strategies for undermining freedom and attacking religion and promoting terrorism. The colonel here goes through the origins of the word disinformation, and he traces it back to a 1952 entry in the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, which says the following. Desinformatia, which is the Russian word, the base word for the English disinformation, means of false reports intended to mislead public opinion. The capitalist press, is the definition, the capitalist press and radio make wide use of desinformatia in order to fool the people, entangle them in lies, and depict the new war being prepared by the Anglo-American imperialist bloc as a defensive weapon, but depict the peaceful politics of the USSR countries of the people's democracy and other peace-loving countries as allegedly aggressive. A special role in the disseminations of this sort of provocative reports of every kind of falsehood belongs to the American capitalist press, radio, and various publication agencies furnishing false information to the press and to other propaganda organizations. And they go on to say, the leading circles of the USA, Great Britain, France, and other imperialist governments often resort to disinformation in matters of international relations. Numerous examples of this kind of disinformation are well known. The word disinformation quite literally comes from a Soviet propaganda effort to paint America and the West as evil and to demonize capitalism. This is the word that is being used by Facebook and Twitter and the FBI to restrict freedom of expression. This is the word that governs the kind of acceptable information that is allowed in the current political discourse. This is the word that you hear uttered, falling from the mouths of so many think tank leaders and world leaders and would-be central planners in the case of WEF. This is the single word, the single concept, and it comes from an oppressive culture and an oppressive regime who are attempting, as all tyrannical regimes do, to manipulate the language to create a environment that is suitable for their ends. Disinformation is quite literally a communist propaganda term. Now, within the definition of disinformation is actually a lie in of itself. The Russians tried to paint this word in its origin as coming from France, when in all reality, as the Colonel notes, there was not even a French word for disinformation in 1952 or in 1978. Many of you were born before this word even became known in France or in America. It was quite literally a propagandist term used by the Soviets to push society towards their ends. And this is the word being used by so many people to dictate policy and to govern how we view speech and expression in society. Disinformation. You saw in the video the demon of disinformation, right? Now, where in the world did this word come from? We already know that it originated from the annals of the propaganda machine in Russia. Now, how in the world did this word become so prominent in the Western political discourse? Well, I will tell you. It has to do directly with the rise and prominence of social media in society. If you were to look back throughout the past 10, 12, 13 years of the posting of this video, and you looked at the incidence of the word disinformation, you would not see it very much in Google Trends up until around 2016, 2017, and thereafter when it experienced a massive spike in the search trends, which basically means that this word was not in common use, or at least not in political discourse, up until a very, very recent time. Now, it's very important to understand that this word didn't indeed emerge after 2016. And around the time of 2016 is when social media itself became a more prominent vehicle for political conversation in America. There's a chart here that you guys have on your screen that comes from Our World in Data, which basically shows that prior to 2016, a lot of people didn't really use social media as much as they did after 2016. So for example here, the chart says the following. In 2012, which was the election cycle before 2016, social media usage was at 59%, whereas cellular phone usage and internet usage and computer usage were actually much higher, all being much higher than social media. But if you get up to 2016 on this same chart, social media usage went up to 69%. Which is almost like a 10-point increase. Then right after 2016, social media usage quite literally surpassed regular internet usage and went up to 80%. And every year after that, it keeps rising or it stays steady. The rise of social media quite literally caused some people to view the dissemination of information in a very different way. Barack Obama even noted this very interesting rise in social media during an interview with The New Yorker at the very end of his presidency, which ended around 2017 when President Trump was sworn in. And he said that the new media ecosystem, which he basically means the system in which social media flourishes, means that everything is true and nothing is true. And I quote, "An explanation of climate change from a Nobel Prize winning physicist looks exactly the same on your Facebook page as the denial of climate change by somebody on the Koch brothers payroll. And the capacity to disseminate misinformation, wild conspiracy theories, and to paint the opposition in a wildly negative light without any rebuttal, that has accelerated in ways that much more sharply polarize the electorate and make it very difficult to have a common conversation." So Barack Obama, at the end of his presidency, was saying, the invention of social media, which again was skyrocketing in his presidency, actually makes it much harder for there to be a common conversation. And what he actually means with that is that it makes it much harder for there to be control. If you indeed have more people being able to add to the conversation, you cannot control the conversation as well. Sure, you have the increased possibility for people to be muttering falsehoods, but you also have the possibility for official narratives created by propaganda and narrative agents to be disrupted by people who have different perspectives. And in my opinion, that's really what he's talking about, because he uses this idea of consensus as a reinforcement for current narratives when consensus has been wrong historically, and we should actually investigate the merits of a claim as opposed to simply relying on the fact that a majority of people agree with the claim. Majorities have had a bad track record throughout history, and that is not a very reliable metric. Obama goes on to say the following: "That marked a decisive change from previous political eras. Ideally, in a democracy, everybody would agree that climate change is the consequence of man-made behavior because that's what 90% of the scientists tell us, and then we would have a debate on how to fix it." So once again, the fact that we're all not agreeing on the premise is a problem for Barack Obama, and evidently it is also a problem for other organizations who have used the word disinformation as a tool to denigrate the rise of free expression that is consequent to the rise of social media. In 2017, as the Scientific American reports, the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report said that the polarization and the viral spread of biased information was one of the most dangerous social trends of the age. Again, all of this stuff, all this talk of misinformation, disinformation, of fake news comes out right about the time when social media usage was skyrocketing and social media became wedded into our political conversation. Whereas in 2012, social media, the extent of social media in the political conversation was advertisements. Social media did not have a massive impact on presidential politics, or any politics really, in 2012. It had some impact, but not a massive one. But in 2016, everything changes. And when everything changes, my friends, the language changes. And my friends, when the language changes, and a relatively new word that has not even been around for 100 years becomes the operative term of everyone in power, you need to be careful. You need to have your eyes peeled. John Podesta echoed Obama a few months after the Obama interview, and Podesta was Hillary Clinton, a big person in Hillary Clinton's campaign, and said that the rise of fake news was one of the reasons why she lost, and that there must be something done to address fake news. After 2016 is when we begin to see social media companies tampering down free speech more than they had done before, adding in disinformation and misinformation regulations, and controlling what is acceptable to say and what is not acceptable to say. After the conversation became unfurled and unchained from the talking heads on cable news, from official narratives, is when people began using this word. There is a direct correlation, as I demonstrated to you in the evidence. Now, to reinforce this point, because I know some folks are going to disagree with me, NPR wrote an article in 2019 that said that disinformation is the word of the year. And in this article, NPR points back to several other words of the year in 2017. They say that propaganda, misinformation, and fake news all were chosen as words of the year in 2017. Again, right after the 2016 election and right after the rise of social media. Why do you think there was such a sea shift in the words used to describe certain things after these two periods? Because once again, the conversation became unfurled and it became uncontrollable. Now, my friends, I have demonstrated to you how this word came about, but what have the consequences of this word been? Well, many of you have heard of the Intercepts report in late 2022, where they basically showed the Department of Homeland Security created the Disinformation Governance Board, which was, of course, heavily ridiculed, heavily planned. But even after the Disinformation Governance Board disbanded because of the level of scrutiny it came under, there were still internal moves by the DHS to regulate and go after certain kinds of disinformation or misinformation. And of course, the targets included, according to the Intercept report, the targets included misinformation about the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines, racial justice, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of U.S. support to Ukraine. So the DHS basically tried to do speech policing of a set of very contentious topics that the regime has a very keen interest in controlling. For what reason? Well, I think the reason is quite obvious. And what did they use to justify these encroachments on free speech? Once again, disinformation, a word that came from the Soviets, was translated throughout time, didn't exist in English or French until like the late 20th century, and then all of a sudden, after 2016, after the conversation becomes decentralized and the cable news people have less power and the official narratives have less power, they immediately begin using this kind of word to evoke a sense of terror in people that would eventually lead to them restricting their speech. Once again. And then after a few years after that, that word becomes the basis for policy. The FBI, as many of you have understood from the Twitter files, sent a range of requests to Facebook and to Twitter about problematic accounts that were saying things that they didn't agree with, that they deemed as misinformation or disinformation. Once again, if something is a lie, wouldn't it be better to go ahead and confront that lie as it is and expose it for the lie it is, as opposed to trying to suppress the lie? If lies are truly lies, confront it and expose it. But once again, that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is not an attempt to understand the nature of certain claims. What's going on here is an attempt to control the realm of human expression. Now, we have established, once again, disinformation comes from the Soviets. It's a communist propaganda term that literally was created to propagandize the West, to demonize capitalism. Number two, disinformation has become so prominent that the FBI, the DHS, and so many other people, as I showed in the clips before, are using that word to dictate policy. And number three, disinformation is being used as a way to decide what speech is okay and what speech is not okay. Now, all of those things should already tell you that this word should not be toyed with. It should not be given legitimacy. It should be left in the Soviet Union where it came from, the old Soviet Union. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. So the last thing I have to tell you guys is why exactly this word is so dangerous, other than the reasons I've mentioned. And this is more of a philosophical reason. My friends, the term disinformation, which if you look at the etymology of it, has the word prefix dis, dis in it. And according to the etymology of that word, that means a lack of or not or the opposite of. Disinformation literally means the lack of information or the opposite of information. Now the problem with this is, my friends, is that all information is valuable. Every bit of information that you get in your life is valuable, whether it be false information or true information. If you could not distinguish truth from falsehood, as John Stuart Mill mentioned in On Liberty, you would not be able to understand the world. In fact, the attempt to get rid of man's ability to reckon with the world on his own terms is a hallmark of tyrannical governments, because they can therefore, after they control what you understand and what you believe, control your actions. So it's very important, not only for the survival of human freedom, but also for the survival of human existence, for human beings to be able to deal with terms and deal with ideas on their own terms, as opposed to being told them or dictated to them by the intelligentsia, by the regime, by social media, by the law enforcement, by any of those agencies. So if we've established that all information is valuable, we should also understand that all information is morally neutral. The term disinformation, as it has been used by Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, who basically said that disinformation is harming democracy at Stanford, and that's the speech you saw earlier, That term is created with moral significance. They are attempting to attach a moral quality to the idea of information. And when information becomes a matter of morality, not a matter of neutral stuff that we discover in our time trying to grasp concepts, that's when certain kinds of information can be deemed dangerous and others safe. You guys don't realize how deep this goes. Let me say this again. When information is considered to be a moral problem and not merely a problem of discovery that is morally neutral, you can therefore deem certain kinds of information dangerous and other kinds of information safe, which is why the idea of hate speech exists. Do you guys see how all this connects together? The idea of hate speech is that we can use intent to criticize and discard certain kinds of information because they are dangerous. This is why the idea that speech is violence comes from. This is where it also comes from. The idea that intent makes information dangerous, when in all reality, information is simply a tool we use to understand the world that is morally neutral, which we can use for good or bad aims. The moment you make information a moral issue, as opposed to an issue of discovery, is the moment you allow speech to be drastically redefined in a way that it can be controlled and often subdued by a tyrannical regime or by someone who wants to conceal the truth. The main argument that the rational man advances against the idea of disinformation is the argument about intent, the problem of intent. Any idea or any person that tries to assume the intent of another person is assuming they have some sort of all-knowing psychic capability. Intent is an incredibly hard thing to discern in any case, even in the cases of murder trials where murder is quite literally the malice of intent if you look at a legal definition. So if it's hard to discern in many cases, why would we use a hard to discern quality, a hard to discern metric to quite literally govern the kinds of speech that are acceptable and are not acceptable? Most importantly, who is going to discern the intent of someone who they claim is working in disinformation? The fact checkers? The people who are linked to big folks like Bill and Melinda Gates who are getting funded by them? Will it be the government who have actually a vested interest in only certain kinds of speech being allowed in the political discourse? Will it be the social media companies that are overran by progressive zealots who have no respect towards free speech? And according to Google, they want to move towards a European model of speech where you can get arrested for saying something that offends someone? Who is going to decide what is disinformation? My friends, the problem is, whenever you run into the problem of intention, you cannot have biased parties, which are all of us, deciding what an intention is, which would therefore mean that it is best not to use the word as a practical matter if we actually want to have flourishing conversations that give voice to as many folks as possible and allow truth and falsehood to be discerned in a critical, rational way, as opposed to being decided on high from the intelligentsia, from the elites, and from the people who have a vested stake in only a certain kind of information being put forward. Disinformation, the concept of disinformation, is quite literally an attempt to obscure the truth by moralizing information and therefore taking it from what it should be properly considered as. My friends, disinformation is not just a communist plot, in my opinion, to taint the minds of those in the West. Disinformation is quite literally a tool used to restrict your human ability to grasp and reckon with the world, and therefore to understand what it means to have good governance, and therefore to understand what it means to have a good politics, and therefore to understand what it means to have a sound system, and therefore to understand what it means to have a good society. And in doing so, it leaves you susceptible to the wills of those who believe they know best, those who possess safe speech, those who possess speech that is proper, that is now under this frame considered proper, and everything else considered improper. My friends, it is very important that all of you reject the word disinformation whenever you hear it, that all of you critically analyze every single bit of information, whether it be things that are upsetting to you or things that are not upsetting to you, and you then make a decision upon your rational inquiry on the usefulness of that information, as opposed to relying on people and terms and concepts that would seek to negate your ability to do that. My friends, this is a very serious issue. This is a very deep issue. Do not use the terms of the cultural terrorists that want to control your ability to understand the world. You are a human being vested with rationality, vested with higher abilities than any other animal on this world in existence, that has allowed you, your civilizations, to go from the caves to the stars in a few thousand years when there are still animals living and eating from the mess of the jungles. Human beings are so fantastic of a creature because of our abilities. And words like disinformation seek to degrade our abilities to a level that we can no longer access their true depth. Reject it in politics, reject it in any other sense. There are other words you can use to describe what some people may claim disinformation stands for. Words like lies, deceit, falsehood, things that are much more ancient and have a much firmer grasp on what they mean, as opposed to a neologism that was created less than 100 years ago. There are plenty of ways. Now, some folks may also say, well, Christian, if a state actor tries to direct public discourse into a certain level, shouldn't we describe that and shouldn't we condemn that? Sure, let's describe it and let's see if we can condemn it, but don't do it through the word disinformation. Do it through the old-fashioned word propaganda. Because funnily enough, that's what the word disinformation is. It is pure, good old-fashioned propaganda. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, please be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video, comment on this video. Please be sure to support me. Support me at Patreon, patreon.com/PhilCWatson. My PayPal, officialcwatson@gmail.com. Be sure to join my Discord, which is in the comment section down below. My friends, I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Happy 2023, everyone.